Hey everyone, it's the Chess Playing Pediatrician here. Today I want to do a tutorial on the back-rank checkmate. This is a checkmate pattern that happens when your opponent's king is restricted to their back row and you are able to put him in check with either your rook or queen in a way where your opponent is unable to block the check or take the checking piece, thus being a checkmate. This is a checkmate pattern that I feel is important for any chess player to be able to recognize and anticipate. It's pretty easy to defend against if you are prepared, but it's also pretty easily missed in some situations. And so I just wanted to show you some examples of this checkmate pattern. Okay, this first example is going to be a very simple example of a back-rank checkmate. So it's black's move here. As you can probably see here, black is clearly in a winning position against white at this point. Black has its queen, its bishop, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns here against white's rook, bishop, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. So if I were black, my next move here would be to move one of these pawns, preferably this pawn, to give my king space to maneuver out of this back row here on the next move if necessary. But instead, I'm going to show you a way that black could make a big blunder here that would allow white to win on the next move. So I'm going to have black move its queen up to threaten the white player's rook right here. So then, as you might be able to see, white just has to move its rook to the black player's back row to put the put the black player in checkmate on the next move here, like that. So that's going to be checkmate because, again, the black king is unable to get out of this back row to get out of check. And also there's no way in this position that the black player can either take this piece or block the check. All right, so this is a game that I actually just played a few days ago. It's a slightly more complex example of a back-rank checkmate. So I'm black in this game and it's my move. So I want you to notice here how the white king is restricted to this back row. He can't move here because his pawn's in the way, and he can't move here or here because he'd be moving into check because of my pawn right here. So once I found myself in this position, my objective was to get my rook to my white player's back row here, putting the king in check, except not there because then his king could just take my rook. So my next move was moving my rook to f2, where he's protected by the pawn here. And then white moved rook to b6, putting my king in check. I moved out of check. And then he made the mistake of aiming for my my back pawn here without making sure his back row was defended. So my next move was to take his back pawn. And then he responded by taking my back pawn. And then I just had to make one more move to put him in checkmate. And you see this is a back-rank checkmate because his king is in check. He cannot move out of check because my pawn is covering this square and this square, and he can't do anything to block or take this rook. All right, so this next example is going to be an even more complex example of a back-rank checkmate. So this was a game I played a couple of months ago probably. It was a fun game because I saw this example for a back-rank checkmate and my opponent anticipated it and was able to get out of it. And then a little bit later in the game, I saw another opportunity to set up a potential back-rank checkmate. My opponent saw it again and was able to get out of it. And then a third time, a few moves later, I was able to see another opportunity for a back-rank checkmate. And this time my opponent didn't see it and I was able to put him in checkmate with this checkmate pattern. So I want to just kind of walk through the last third or so of this game. So I'm playing white, my opponent's playing black, and it's my opponent's move. So he moves his b7 pawn to threaten my bishop. I respond by taking that pawn with my pawn. He responds by taking that pawn with his pawn. I then respond by taking that pawn with my bishop. And so at this point is kind of when I see an opportunity to restrict his king to this back row by moving my bishop right here. So he threatens my bishop, and I move my bishop to c6. So you see here how I have his king restricted to this back row. His king can't move here because his pawn's in the way. He can't move here or here because my bishop is blocking those two squares. So I'm going to show you. And so at this point, my objective was to try to get my rook back here to hopefully put his king in checkmate. I can't do it yet because his rook's here, but I was just waiting for an opportunity to get my rook back to his back row to check his king. So I'm just going to show you the next several moves here. Okay, so at this point, I see this opportunity to go and take his pawn, which I do with my rook, after I get out of check there. So he puts me in check again. I get out of check. And then when he is double threatening my knight, I go and take that h7 pawn. And so then, at this point, if I had been able to move into this back row on my next move, that would have been checkmate. But he anticipates that and moves his king over to this b8 square, which gives him an escape route if I were to check him here. And then even though it's not checkmate, I put him in check anyway just to kind of keep him on the run. So he then moves out of check to a7. I then move my rook to a8 to put him back in check. You see my rook is protected by this bishop here. He moves his king to b6 to get out of check. I then put him in check again with my rook. He moves to a7 to get out of check as well as to threaten my rook. I then put him in check again with my rook. And then he moves to a6 to get out of check. I then take his back pawn. He then takes my knight with his rook. I then put him in check with my bishop. You see that my king is protecting my bishop there. He moves his king to b6 to get out of check and also to threaten my rook there. I put him in check again with my rook. And again, my rook is protected by my bishop and my pawn, so he can't take my rook. He then responds by moving out of check to a7. I then take that back pawn right there. And then he puts my king in check with his rook. I move my king out of check. And then he starts trying to get his pawn back to my back row to get his queen back. I then put him in check again with my rook. And then he moves his king back into the back row there. And then at this point, I see another opportunity for back-rank checkmate. I then move my king to b6 here. And you see that restricts his king to this back row. He can't move here or here or here because my king is blocking him on those three squares. So he then anticipates what I'm doing and moves his d2 rook to c2 to block me in case I tried to check him with my rook there. Had he not done that, I could have checked him with my rook right here, and that would have been checkmate. But again, he anticipated that and moved his rook right here so that he could block on this square in case I had tried to check him with my rook there. So then I respond by advancing my pawn to get closer to his back row. He responds by continuing to advance his pawn. I then move my rook to e7, both to get out of the way of my pawn, to clear this path for my pawn, as well as to threaten his pawn. And then he responds, again, by continuing to advance his pawn. And then I continue to advance my pawn. And then he sees that my pawn is about to get to the back row and become a queen, which would be checkmate. So he tries to stop that by threatening my pawn. But by so doing, he leaves this row unprotected, and so he makes himself vulnerable for back rank mate. And then all I have to do to put him in checkmate is to move my rook up 1 square to his back row. And you see that's checkmate because I have him in check. He isn't able to move out of check because these 3 spots are covered by my king, and there's nothing he can do to either take my rook or block with one of his pieces. So that is checkmate. All right, so there you have a back-rank checkmate. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also look me up on Instagram and Facebook as the Chess Playing Pediatrician for more videos and chess tutorials, as well as more videos discussing topics related to child development, behavior, and wellness.